eventually, all of this frustration over the changing economy and the lack of response from the government leads to, well, a farmer's revolt. See, falling commodity prices are really causing a lot of things to begin to pile on. So in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, all these things that we've already talked about, overproduction, falling prices, new technologies leading to even better production, even lower prices, leads to high debt burdens on most of the producers in the American agricultural sector. Well, there's other things that are starting to squeeze farmers. For instance, high transportation and storage rates. One of those natural monopolies that I spoke of would include grain elevators and places to store your crops. So the farmers begin to vent their anger against targets that they can get their hands on. In this case, railroads become the primary target. Farmers begin to blame their woes on railroads, even though so much of their woes are intangibles and kind of over-the-horizon factors. Railroads are right there. Let's go for them first. And if you can't hit a railroad, then hit a grain elevator. So those are your first two targets. Something needs to happen to regulate the rates that railroads and grain elevators charge. Problem is, farmers are not naturally organized. In fact, the nature of farming is that you go and run your farm as a rugged individualist. You don't go to meetings. You don't form committees. You handle your business, and that's that. Even so, pretty soon there's enough mad farmers showing up at the same meetings that they begin to organize. Really, the first true organization of farmers in the post-Civil War period is the rise of what's known as the Grange. The Grange, or the Patrons of Husbandry, rise up in 1867, and it's a Midwestern phenomenon. And essentially, it started out as an educational and social group, but became a forum for farmers to complain about their situation. And ultimately, they began to think about ways that they could affect freight rates, elevator rates, things like that. The Grange comes to Texas in 1873. And the first Grange meeting in the state is in Salado, Texas, down in central Texas. But the Grange never really sticks in Texas. And by the early 1880s, the Grange is on the decline, primarily because the farmers could not even begin to tackle some of the big issues that needed tackling. Well, Texas, of course, is not going to let a good mad go on without them. So in 1877, you have the rise of the Farmers Alliance in Lampasas, Texas. It's actually a rival to the Grange, and as such, really is fairly tepid until the Grange starts to fade, and then all of a sudden, the Farmers Alliance catches fire. Well, what are they about? They're more for cooperative action through, controlling prices through collective action. This would mean things like co-op stores, collective ownerships of mills, gins, and presses. And after 1885, this idea of farmers pooling their resources for a cooperative goal really takes off. And in fact, the Texas-born and bred Farmers Alliance spreads throughout the South and the Midwest. Not only was it a political action group, but it was also a social and recreational organization. It was a family group. Everybody got together at these meetings, and they all looked forward to the Farmers Alliance meeting because they got to see old friends. The youngsters got to play with each other. The teenagers got to flirt with each other. It was great. But they stressed political action. Well, before long, there's even a colored Farmers Alliance that's formed in 1886 because we're still in a very segregated nation at the time. Ultimately, though, the Farmers Alliance also failed to meet its goals alone. So here's how it differed from the Grange. They began to seek allies. And in fact, they're looking for people that have political savvy and political connection to take the farmers' cause to the next level. Well, what did they want? Well, one of the things that they proposed is what they called the Sub-Treasury Plan. Here's the idea. If everybody's crops comes ripe at the exact same time in the year, that's going to cause a seasonal drop in prices because the production is all peaking at the same time. The supply and demand, simple economics. So what these guys wanted was for the government to get involved in regulating the supply of crops that were hitting the market. Essentially, the government would artificially inflate prices by keeping some of the product out of circulation. In fact, farmers wanted to use that stored crop as collateral on government loans. They wanted to be able to borrow up to 80% of that stored crop's price so that they could then begin another production cycle. And they also wanted this loan at a fairly low rate, say 1%. So they're really wanting the government to start bankrolling their farming operation. Well, this Sub-Treasury Plan is kicked around for a couple of decades, and it'll finally be implemented in a different form in the 20th century during the New Deal. But it doesn't take hold at that point in the late 19th century because something new comes in and really renders the idea of a sub-treasury obsolete. And that is the fine art of commodities trading. With commodities trading, you have a number of ways of looking at how to trade in crops. One is spot market, one is forwards or futures, and the other is hedging. So let's go through those. What's the spot market? Well, that's the farmer's produce now at this particular date and his price now. So everything is handled right now. Forwards or futures is the farmer's price now, but it's future produce. And the buyer buys when that produce is delivered at prices negotiated on this date, but the product is delivered on this date. Great. That way, you have a guarantee of produce being in the marketplace and the farmer has a sale. Well, there's also hedging. Hedging is the farmer's price now against your future produce, but the buyer buys your produce guaranteed, but at prices that occur at that future date. So he's hedging his bets that the price will fall. So that's a hedge position versus a futures position versus a spot position. Okay, so essentially you have financial instruments that come in and help take some of this pressure off that would have otherwise required a sub-treasury, as the Farmers Alliance proposed. Where is the commodities trading capital of the nation? Chicago. All roads seem to, or at least all railroads, all seem to lead to Chicago. So naturally, that becomes the commodities trading hub of the nation. Well, this leads to a general decline in the Farmers Alliance. What had started as just a local protest movement ballooned to more than 6 million members and actually becomes the raw fuel for what will later become known as the populist revolt. So things like the Grange and the Farmers Alliance fuel populism within the United States. Populism and its political manifestation, the People's Party, will assume the leadership of all these aggrieved farmers and laborers, but in Texas we're really talking about farmers. But the Sub-Treasury Plan fades because of all the commodities trading. And by 1896, the Farmers Alliance, pretty much its mission spent, fades into the pages of history.